The neighborhood of Green Valley was a serene, picturesque place, known for its charming houses and friendly residents. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else, and a feeling of safety and community pervaded the streets. But as with any seemingly idyllic neighborhood, there was a darker side that lurked beneath the surface. My wife, Emily, and I had recently moved to Green Valley in search of a peaceful life away from the chaos of the city. We were delighted with our new home, a cozy 2-story house with a white picket fence that bordered a small but well-maintained garden. As we settled into our new life, we made an effort to get to know our neighbors. They welcomed us with open arms, inviting us over for dinner and neighborhood gatherings. But there was one resident, a man named Edward Montgomery, who lived 2 houses down, that remained a mystery. Edward was a reclusive figure who rarely participated in neighborhood events. Despite our attempts to be friendly, he always seemed to find a reason to avoid us. Emily would often joke that he was the neighborhood enigma, a title that stuck. The rumors about Edward began to circulate among the neighbors. Some said he was a retired detective. Others whispered that he had a troubled past, but no one knew the truth. It was this shroud of secrecy that made him all the more intriguing. The first sign that something was amiss occurred one summer evening. Emily and I were enjoying a glass of wine on our front porch when we spotted Edward for the first time. He was standing in his front yard, staring at our house, his eyes hidden behind a pair of dark sunglasses. Emily nudged me and whispered, "Isn't that Edward?" I nodded, unable to shake the unease that had settled within me. He stood there, unblinking, as if he were studying our every move. It was as if he were assessing us, sizing us up, but for what purpose I couldn't fathom. Over the coming weeks, we would often catch glimpses of Edward from our porch. He would stand at his window, gazing out into the street, or sit in his car for hours on end, watching our house. It was as if he were a silent sentinel guarding a secret we were not privy to. Emily and I would often discuss our neighbor's behavior in hushed tones. It was clear that there was something unusual about Edward, and we couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast long shadows across the neighborhood, I decided to pay Edward a visit. It was an attempt to bridge the gap, to understand the man who had remained such an enigma. I approached his house and knocked on the front door, but there was no response. I could hear the faint sound of a television from within, but it was as if Edward had simply disappeared. I left a friendly note with my contact information and decided to give him some space. Days turned into weeks, and Edward's behavior only grew more peculiar. He would stand at his window, sometimes in the middle of the night, and we would often catch him watching our house through his binoculars. It was as if he were always vigilant, always observing. Emily, who had always been the more cautious of the two of us, grew increasingly concerned. She suggested we contact the authorities, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there had to be a rational explanation for Edward's behavior. Perhaps he was a lonely old man, a recluse who had grown accustomed to his own habits. But one night everything changed. It was a particularly cold evening, and Emily and I were bundled up on the couch watching television. The room was bathed in a soft, warm light, and we felt safe and secure within the walls of our home. As we chatted and laughed, I happened to glance out the window. What I saw sent a shiver down my spine. Edward was standing in our front yard, illuminated by the dim glow of the street lamp. He held something in his hand, and I could see that it was a photograph of us, a picture taken through our living room window. I sprang to my feet, my heart racing, and flung the front door open. I shouted at Edward, demanding an explanation for his intrusion. He didn't respond, but simply turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. I was seething with anger and fear. Emily and I decided that it was finally time to contact the authorities. We provided them with a detailed account of Edward's unsettling behavior, including the incident with the photograph. The police assured us that they would look into the matter, but in the days that followed, our anxiety only grew. The presence of Edward had cast a long, dark shadow over our lives, and the feeling of being constantly watched had become a haunting reality. A few weeks passed, and the police informed us that they had questioned Edward about the photograph. He had explained it away as a simple misunderstanding, a mistake, and there was no concrete evidence to suggest otherwise. The authorities could do little more, and we were left feeling vulnerable and exposed. One evening, as Emily and I sat on our porch, we spotted Edward standing near his fence, staring at us with an intensity that sent a chill down our spines. His gaze was unwavering, and it was as if he were trying to convey a message, though we couldn't discern its meaning. I stood up, unable to bear the sense of unease any longer, and approached Edward. "What do you want from us?" I demanded. He remained silent for a moment, and then, in a voice that was both chilling and earnest, he whispered, "I'm trying to protect you." "Protect us from what?" Edward hesitated, his gaze never leaving us, and then he said, "You don't understand. They're watching, always watching. We have to be careful, you see. The truth is out there, and we must protect it." I couldn't make sense of his words, and I realized that he had succumbed to his delusions, that his obsession with surveillance had led him down a dark and twisted path. Emily tugged at my arm, urging me to return to the safety of our porch, and as we retreated, Edward's gaze followed us, haunting and unrelenting. Days turned into weeks, and the sense of being constantly watched only grew more oppressive. We knew that we had to protect ourselves, to take control of our own lives. We installed security cameras, changed the locks on our doors, and did everything we could to regain our sense of security. But one evening, as we sat in our living room, the power suddenly went out. It was a stormy night, and we could hear the howling wind outside. Emily and I exchanged worried glances, and I grabbed a flashlight, determined to investigate the cause of the outage. As I ventured into the darkened hallway, I heard a sound that sent a jolt of fear coursing through me. It was a voice, soft and cold, that seemed to emanate from the shadows. "You shouldn't have tried to escape." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, and I shone the flashlight into the hallway. There, standing in the shadows, was Edward. His eyes were filled with a malevolent gleam, and he held a knife in his hand. Emily's scream pierced the darkness, and I could hear her struggling in the living room. I rushed back, but it was too late. Edward had attacked her, and she lay on the floor, blood pooling around her. I grabbed the nearest object I could find and swung it at Edward, hitting him in the head. He crumpled to the ground, and I rushed to Emily's side, my hands trembling as I tried to stem the bleeding. The police arrived shortly after, and Edward was taken into custody. He was charged with attempted murder, and the truth about his obsession with surveillance and his delusions finally came to light. Emily survived the attack, but the scars, both physical and emotional, would never truly heal. Our peaceful life in Green Valley had been shattered, and the feeling of being watched had left us forever changed. The end. Second story begins. Moving to the bustling city was a dream I had harbored since my childhood in the quiet countryside. The opportunity finally arrived when I secured a job in the heart of the metropolis. I found a cozy apartment on the 7th floor of an old building, and the city's vibrant energy flowed through its veins. I had anticipated many challenges, but what awaited me in the apartment below was beyond my wildest imagination. The first few weeks in the city were a whirlwind of excitement. I was awestruck by the towering skyscrapers, the endless stream of people, and the ceaseless hum of life. My apartment was a haven of tranquility, and I often spent my evenings on the balcony, gazing at the city lights below. It was during one such evening that I first noticed the peculiar occurrences. A muffled sound like distant whispers seemed to rise from the apartment below mine. At first I dismissed it as a figment of my imagination, the city's symphony playing tricks on my senses. However, the sounds persisted, growing more distinct each night. I couldn't help but wonder about the neighbors who resided in the apartment below. They were a mystery to me, as I had not yet met them, and the apartment's occupant had recently moved in, just like me. The sounds emanating from below were a peculiar mix of hushed conversations, muffled laughter, and occasional crying. It was as if the inhabitants of the apartment were engaged in a perpetual state of discussion, never raising their voices, but their conversations were impossible to ignore. One evening, as I leaned over my balcony railing trying to identify the source of the sounds, I spotted a dim light emanating from the window below. A faint glow painted the curtains in shades of amber, and the silhouette of a person could be seen moving in the room. The sight piqued my curiosity. The following day, I decided to introduce myself to the new neighbors. I approached their door, my knuckles rapping against the wood. No response. I knocked once more with the same result. It was as if the apartment had been abandoned. Perplexed, I inquired with other tenants in the building about the inhabitants of the apartment below. No one seemed to know them. and they too mentioned hearing the odd sounds, like the ghostly echoes of conversations. The mystery deepened. Each night, as the city below transformed into a glowing labyrinth, the strange occurrences in the apartment below continued. The hushed voices persisted, and sometimes I would catch a glimpse of shadowy figures moving within. It was clear that someone was living there, but they chose to remain hidden from the world. As weeks turned into months, my unease grew. I contemplated reporting the matter to the building's management, but I had no evidence of any wrongdoing. The whisperings, however unsettling, did not constitute a crime. One evening, while I was trying to unravel the mystery, I noticed something peculiar. The lights from the apartment below had grown dim, their glow flickering like a fading ember. The hushed conversations had ceased, and silence filled the space. The change was unnerving, and it was as if the apartment had become a void. I couldn't help but wonder what had transpired within its walls. In the following days, I became increasingly anxious. The apartment below remained shrouded in darkness, and the whispers had given way to a silence that seemed to stretch into eternity. Unable to bear the tension any longer, I decided to involve the building management. The superintendent, Mr. Dawson, listened to my concerns and promised to investigate the matter. He assured me that he would pay a visit to the apartment and try to identify the tenants. Days passed, and I anxiously awaited an update from Mr. Dawson. However, the information he provided only deepened my disquiet. When he had approached the apartment below, he found the door locked and no one answered his knocks. Peering through the windows, he saw that the apartment was empty, devoid of any furniture or personal belongings. The situation had grown increasingly bizarre. The apartment below remained uninhabited, yet the odd sounds continued to emanate from it, as if it held secrets that defied explanation. One evening, as I once again gazed at the window of the enigmatic apartment, I saw something that made my blood turn cold. The curtains had been drawn back and the room was bathed in an eerie, pulsating light. I could see shadowy figures moving within, their movements erratic and unnatural. I watched in horrified fascination as the figures seemed to writhe and twist, their forms morphing into grotesque shapes. It was a nightmarish spectacle that defied all reason. The apartment had become a place of unimaginable horror, a dark anomaly within the building. Terrified, I contacted the police, explaining the strange occurrences and the unsettling events that had transpired within the apartment below. The officers arrived promptly and I led them to the apartment. When they attempted to open the door, they found it unlocked, as if someone had recently left. The apartment was in disarray, furniture overturned, and the walls adorned with strange symbols. It was a scene of chaos and madness. The officers conducted a thorough search, but they found no one inside. It was as if the apartment had been abandoned in a hurry, its occupants vanishing into thin air. The mystery of the apartment below remained unsolved, and it left me with a sense of dread that would haunt me for years to come. The building's tenants whispered about the start events, their voices filled with uncertainty and fear. No one could explain the inexplicable, the bizarre occurrences in the apartment that defied all reason. The whisperings, the creepy light, and the unsettling figures continued to linger in the minds of those who had witnessed them, a chilling reminder that some mysteries are never meant to be unraveled.